Today we're going over 5 skills that every Commander player needs to have.
I'm Mia, and I'm going to watch a movie later.
I'm BZ. I know way too much of the Bionicle lore. We're the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. That's the best place to go buy singles, doubles, triples, any sort of Magic Gathering thing that you can buy. Card Kingdom's the best place to buy it, and we have a link in the description specifically for you to see the cool stuff that we would recommend that you buy. And everyone who buys something on Card Kingdom also supports the Nitpicking Nerds channel. It's just this whole cycle. It's great.
That's us. That's us on the website. Go check it out because that shows that we sent you. We also have a Patreon where you can go and support the channel, keep our lights on, make sure the cats go to college, and we can do some stuff for you, like check out your decks, have one-on-one calls with you, and never before seen content on the entire internet except for Patreon of us.
Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use code
NERDS
at checkout, see how we swapped that? You could save 5% of your real money, hard-earned blood, sweat, and tears tax dollars that you'd much rather spend on something else. So buy the same sleeves from the same place, but save money through us.
They have the spirit animal sleeves that you can get right now, and they're perfect for Bloomborough.
And Moxfield, there will be an ad somewhere. You can't guess where it is. You can try, but you will be wrong. So we're going to be going over 5 skills I think every Commander player is going to need to have. These are going to come up, if not most games, every game.
I think so too. These are pretty important, and they're not really the things in the game mechanics where it's like pretty cut and dry. There's something you learn over experience and just a lot of games after playing with people. Some people are more prone to doing certain ones than others, so, you know, your mileage may vary based on your playgroup. But the first one we want to talk about is knowing when your opponents won't block. I think this is completely important because a little bit of damage spread out over a few turns will just add up over the long run and might make the difference between winning and knocking a player out. So not all creatures are created equal. Do people really want to be blocking with certain 1/1s or 1/2s like Deathrite Shaman or their Mana Dork that they're using to set up their bigger game plans later?
Yeah, we talk all the time about missing free attacks or like me wanting to take every free attack that is available to me. And I think there's a lot more free attacks in a Commander game than people realize. And I've definitely seen, I mean, we play a ton of games with a ton of different people. So we've seen this a lot where people just kind of miss what I would consider a free attack because they think that their opponent is going to block and trade off and they'll both lose their creatures. But I think a lot of times it will benefit you to put yourself in your opponent's shoes and think, do I want to lose the creature that I have in play that would trade, let's just say I have a random 2/2 with my 2/2, or can I just attack them and then deal 2 damage? Like, of course there is things to consider, like, will they attack me back and will this other things happen? But I think a lot of times there are just attacks that you could make, you could offer a trade, and I think your opponent will not take that trade and will just take the damage, resulting in basically a free attack, I think. We can break this down by using essential creatures versus non-essential creatures. If I have a non-essential creature, I don't really care what happens to it. So this is a creature I'm actively looking to get in damage with, maybe attack a Planeswalker, take the Monarchy, or sacrifice later for my own like nefarious purposes. But if I have an essential creature, it's probably something I want to treat more like an enchantment, where no, I don't want you to get your hands dirty. Don't get involved in combat. I need to tap you for mana, or I need to use you as a card draw engine. So if our opponent has an essential creature and we have a non-essential creature, absolutely I am jamming in because I would love that trade. And I think 99% of the time they won't make that trade, which means you get free damage that you might be missing by not attacking.
Just because they have untapped creatures does not mean that they are not a free attack. I think thinking of the way your creatures work, if you make tokens, for example, if you're not going to be using those for things like Plumb the Forbidden or a Convoke cost, and you're just kind of making them for free, or you don't have any death triggers like Marionette Apprentice or anything like that, sending them in could be a good way to trade off those creatures that are useless or free with things that other people spent mana on. If a 2/2 comes at me and I'm playing Kaalia, I'm not trading Kaalia for a 2/2 because that is just, I would rather be hit with 2 life rather than trade off my commander, which I will have to pay 6 for, and it's already kind of prone to removal to begin with.
That's a great example because I think it's so obvious there that you're not going to block anything with Kaalia of the Vast if you play it. But I've certainly seen it happen where people will go, who doesn't have blockers? And they'll count, you know, in this example, you, as having a blocker, and it's like, absolutely, she does not have a blocker. She will never block. I could send a 1/1 with no abilities in and she still wouldn't block because it's just not worth the risk for her entire game plan to be delayed multiple turns, in this case by her commander being risked at all. It's so much easier for her to just take the 1 And then because you know this, you just send in the 1/1, send in the 2/2, and she will take the damage in that case. Trading off creatures just in general is not ideal for either player. That's why we would want to have a non-essential creature first. But no two players want to trade off essential creatures. Even if it is getting rid of one of your opponents, losing your own is way more detrimental because there's still two other opponents who aren't even involved in that exchange at all.
I guess a good way to also think about this exchange is how much mana did they invest into the creature that they played, and also just how easy is it to get back. If there's a creature that when it dies, it'll come back immediately with like Undying or something, people might be more willing to trade that off. But if it's their commander and it's a 3/3 and they spent 6 mana and they're like, please don't kill this, guys, I don't think they're really going to be trading that off for your 4/4 that you made with like Azuri's Predation or something like that.
Yeah, I think we have a couple good examples of creatures that are essential that you will not find blocking as often as it might seem like they could block. The first one that I've played a ton of, Queen Marchesa. This is funny because this creature looks like it's made to trade off. And it's so funny to me that this card does provide incremental advantage as the game goes on. Even though it's a 3/3 with Death Touch that looks like it can block a 6/6 and trade all day, I almost never, ever, ever trade with this card. And it pretty much only exists to deter attacks for me because I want to keep it out. I want to make assassins when I lose the monarchy. So I want someone to, make a deal with me, attack me for 1, take the monarch, then I take it back with my new assassin. But this is a funny one because if someone kills my Queen Marchesa with like a Soul Shatter or a, incidental sacrifice effect, I'm actually pretty upset. So even if your opponent has something like this, where it looks like, even if they say it too, because they'll just go, I'll just block it. It's like, make them do it, because half the time, I guarantee you, they will not do it. And the other half of the time, if you have a non-essential creature, you get to kill their commander.
I think Queen Marchesa is a very interesting one because it is Death Touch and because it's a 3/3. It's not like you can really send out free attacks with it unless you like make the deal with the Marchesa player because it's Monarch, and that's pretty important as the game goes on. But I think that because it is weird stats of 3/3, that's like pretty beefy. You can't really send as many free tokens over there as you would like. So I think that also applies to why attacks are often deterred with Marchesa. I think a different example of this would be like Zulaport Cutthroat, because that is a creature where it would not make sense to be like trading off your 1/1 for this, because it's just, this is such a vital piece to your game plan and you don't really gain anything when it dies except for the one trigger off of it, and that's really not worth it.
Yeah, usually when aristocrat players play a Zulaport Cutthroat in the early game, it's more just to store mana. They say, I don't want to spend nothing on turn 2. This Zulaport Cutthroat won't be relevant until like turn 7. Maybe it'll get a few pings in, but it's not going to be very relevant until I try to actually go off or set my chains into motion. So when they just kind of play it, it's not really a creature in play. If you have any non-essential creature of any size, they are not going to chump block with this. They are not going to trade off with it. They are just going to take the damage. So I guess, again, maybe it's better to not register people as having blockers versus not having blockers. It's more like essential blockers versus non-essential blockers.
It's just, what are they willing to lose, I think, is a good way to look at this. And a lot of people, especially when they put mana into it or it's a pivotal part of their game plan, are not willing to lose a lot, especially in the early turns.
A really good example, actually, is Tireless Provisioner, and we can throw in Tireless Tracker, too. These are cards that no one ever blocks with. They generate advantage the longer they are in play. So on turn 3 or turn 4, if they've made a food or a clue and you attack with anything that's a 3/3 or a 2/2, I promise you they're not blocking it. And if they are, you're probably really happy about it.
Yeah, they really won't. Mine is also Sir Conrad. I have a Wheels deck, and Sir Conrad is a pretty big piece because it's hard to get damage on people when you're drawing them so many cards. So when Sir Conrad is out, I don't really want to take the chance. If there is something coming at me and it's gigantic and it might kill me because of like commander damage, I might block with it. But if I can throw anything else in front of it, I will. This is just such a pivotal piece of so many game plans. Even though it is a 5/4, it's still not worth the risk in my opinion, especially if you have an onboard way to give it death, like your creature that you're swinging at me, like Death Touch or extra stats, or if I'm worried about that in any way, I will not be blocking.
Yeah, Sir Conrad definitely sits in play more often as like a pseudo enchantment. This is interesting because Sir Conrad, when we start to increase the amount of mana of your opponent's supposed blocker, I'm starting to be willing to send more things into that. Like if I have a Queen Marchesa, I would view that as semi-essential. But now that you have a 5-drop that's probably even more essential for you, I'm actually okay sending that in a lot of the times. I'll offer those trades. And I think when you get up to this, you see this a lot after like a board wipe. So someone develops, they play a Sir Conrad, and maybe you have like a 5/5 with haste. I am jamming in on that Sir Conrad player like all day because I'm pretty sure they are not blocking. And if they are, the board's somewhat even, so I can make that call. I can say, I think this creature is non-essential. I think that Sir Conrad is essential. Boom.
Though 40 life is a lot to have in Commander, it really does help the game go quicker and to help swing the game into your favor if you do get these free attacks in early, or at least when you can. A couple damage here, a couple damage there is life that they cannot use to other thing, which brings us to our next point, using life as a resource. Sometimes you can use cards that allow you to trade life for mana, cards, etc. And that's pretty well known among Magic. And because you need these things to win, and we start out with a lot of life. 40 is a ton of life in Commander, but are you willing to trade that life for other things where you can get ahead in the game? There's oftentimes there's a good chance that the answer would be yes. One of the best examples of this is Mana Crypt. I know we've gotten a couple comments that say, like, Mana Crypt isn't worth the 3 life that I get hit with sometimes, but I tend to disagree strongly. I would take a Mana Crypt every day. This is one of the most powerful cards in Commander, and the fact that it comes down free and you could tap it for 2 mana immediately means that I am happy to take the 3 life risk 50% of the time.
Yeah, so you definitely need mana and or cards to win a game. I don't think it's possible to win a game without either one of those, but you do not need life to win a game. And Commander, I think, starts with a lot of life. Like 40 is a humongous amount of life. So we certainly have extra life to spare in terms of like spending it with certain abilities. Like, and then you mentioned Mana Crypt. I think Mana Crypt might be the best card in the entire format. Like just full stop. It's up there. It's like top 3 for sure. Top 4 maybe. Mana Crypt gives you 2 extra mana for 0 investment, but it says, oh, I'm going to tax your life total. Basically, every turn you lose 1.5 life. I think it's probably a better way to look at it versus like, oh, sometimes you'll lose none and sometimes you'll lose 9 over 3 turns. Let's just say 1.5 life. We want to say, like, is 2 mana each turn worth 1.5 life? You can sort of crunch the numbers for yourself and think of like a turn 1 Mana Crypt. How much mana is that going to make? How much would it cost to generally make that much mana? And then when you look at, oh, what did I pay? 0 mana for a 1.5 life each turn? I think the math is ludicrously in favor of Mana Crypt in that specific example. Another one that very obviously trades cards for life is the One Ring. It's a 4 mana artifact. When it enters, if you cast it, you gain protection from everything. It taps to put a burden counter on itself, then draws you a card for each burden counter on it. And then on your upkeep, you take life equal to the number of burden counters on it. So you can pay 4 mana, draw a card. Then next upkeep, you take 1, then you draw 2 cards. Then the next upkeep, you take 2, then you draw 3 cards. This thing adds up very, very quickly. And it is another example of, absolutely, I would love to pay life for cards in this case.
I mean, this is a nutty card. It can go in any deck. It scales so well for, like, it doesn't matter if you're taking 15 damage because I can win at 1, but it's definitely going to be way better against my opponents if I have 15 more cards in my hand because I can get to my win cons faster, I can get to my protection faster, etc. So it kind of leads us to this interesting debate of, like, is the life worth the cards? We always think, yes, we would rather take the damage, but we've seen comments before that say, like, we've played like Atraxa and Oscar. There was a game with Decked Out that we played, and it was like a very interesting one because I had Atraxa out, and they said, why don't you proliferate BZ's One Ring? And as a poison deck, I think that's an interesting question because I think that I don't care about their life total. If they are at 9 life and they have 8 burden counters on the ring, I will proliferate to the 9th one because they'll die before they get to use the cards. But if they're at 1 and I proliferate to 2 and they're at 35 life, I'm going to kill them with poison faster than they will ever get to be burned out by the ring, and I don't want to give them any more cards. I don't want them to have the trade of 1 more life taken versus 1 more card given. That's just not equal to me.
Yeah, we're looking at a lot of examples where it is very obviously in your favor. Just to sort of like get a baseline here, that's a very interesting example because I think even you could just remove the infect part out of it. That kind of takes away from the whole overall example. It's like, should you proliferate your opponent's One Ring? I would say, unless they are literally going to die, never do that. Because I think one simple equation that we do know to be worth it in Commander is 1 life equals 1 card. That's usually a pretty good deal. If I could pay 3 mana and 3 life to draw 3 cards, that's like the par. That I'm pretty happy to do that. Of course, if your mana doesn't scale, then I'm happy to pay 10 life to draw 10 cards. Certainly, there are cards that do that. Necropotence is a common example. That's basically just pay 1 life, draw 1 card. Yawgmoth's Bargain is pay 1 life, draw 1 card. Literally, that card is banned. Gristlebrand does the same thing in increments of 7, also banned. So this is some of the best ways to exchange life for cards, at least in Commander when you only start with 40. But yeah, when I'm going to be paying with the One Ring is I'm paying life for cards. And in this case, it's better than 1 life for 1 card. The thing you trade off then is time. But I'm tapping to draw. By the time I untap with this, I'm drawing 3 cards and I've taken 1 damage. Okay, that's amazing for me. Then the next time I untap with it, I've now drawn 6 cards and taken 3 damage. Okay. Then I go again, I've drawn 10 cards and only taken 6 damage from this thing, and it just gets better from there. So proliferating it just makes it way worse for you. I think you might lose the game. You might lose the game to the One Ring player if you proliferate it right after they play it and they get to go the whole game without being under much pressure and finding more cards. Because the thing about the One Ring is, oh no, I'm under pressure from the One Ring. You know what will help with that? Drawing a bunch of cards.
I will never proliferate the One Ring unless the person is about to die. It's not worth it overall, especially since we do start at 40. I mean, it's turn, like, let's be generous here. It's turn 4, let's say. You play the One Ring as your turn 4 play, and you have protection from everything, so no one can attack you that turn anyways. So at worst, you're going to be taking 1 the turn around, and then you'll be drawing 3. That's such a good deal, and I don't want it to be, oh, you're going to be I add 1 more counter, but you're going to be drawing that many more cards. That's not worth it to me, because the clock on you is so much slower than the clock on me is at that rate.
Yeah, so we know that 1 life for 1 card is usually a good trade. We also know that 1 mana for 1 life is also a very good trade. We see things like, obviously Mana Crypt was there, but Bolas' Citadel too, it lets you pay the mana value of a card but with life. So if I have a 6-drop on top, I can pay 6 life to cheat out 6 mana. That's an amazing deal. I know in Bolas Citadel's case, you are also drawing a card, so that does factor in. But just in general, these are the cards and these are the exchanges to look out for that are extremely, extremely worth it. I promise you, there are ways to cheat around all of these cards that we're mentioning that are completely bonkers. I think it just feels bad to lose life in certain chunks. But I think it's important to reframe it that these cards, while losing you life, are gaining you so much advantage on the board and in the actual progress of the game, where we look at who's winning the game, how close are they to winning. These cards will say that you're winning and you are very close. It does feel bad, if you pay 20 life with the Citadel and then they blow it up and they blow up all the creatures somehow. Let's just pretend that happens. That would feel kind of bad. But it's important to know that this is well beyond worth it for what you're getting. There are infinite versions also of pay life, draw card. Sometimes it's pay 2 life to draw a card. Sometimes it's pay 3 life to make a mana. You got to figure out what your deck wants. But I think every deck should consider this stuff. Like every single deck, you don't have to have life gain.
I mean, just remember, you can always win at 1 life. You just can't go to 0.
You can never win at 1 mana. You can always win at 1 life, or you can never win with 1 card. All right, next up, this one is going to be a tricky one because there's a lot going on here. We'll probably zero in on a specific aspect, but this is politics, and I'm going to say more specifically, it's the art of the deal. When you actually go ahead and make a deal, I think we're going to talk about reading or creating the fine print in the deals that you make. Perfect example, we'll go over this, and then I'm sure we'll have plenty more to get into with this. Let's just propose this example. Someone promises not to attack you as part of a deal that you guys make. On their turn, they attack someone else, but then they kill you with a crackle with power. How do you feel? We did a poll on YouTube. We wanted to see how you guys felt. We got 14,700 responses, which is funny because that is less than 1% margin of error from what I would assume that our people think. We have an 88% of people saying, that's fine. They said, it's on me for not reading the fine print. I should have made a more specific deal. I got your, they can say all right, you got me, but I got your number for the next time. So that's 88% of people say that's totally fine. 12,900 votes. And then 12% say that's not fine. 1,750 people saying that feels cheap, or I don't really like that, or, why are you going to play the game that way, that sort of thing. We're going to focus on the 88% that say it's fine because that's a pretty overwhelming majority.
I think that with the deal, it is so important to be specific. Magic is a game of specifics, and playing into that with a multiplayer format means that your deals also have to be specific. I think there's a very big difference between you don't touch my board or me or anything I do, and you don't disrupt anything I do for the next turn cycle, versus I have protection from you for the next turn cycle, because I think of protection kind of like when the ring comes down, you have protection, right? But if someone plays a Soul Shatter, well, they didn't really target me and that sort of thing. So I think that I think the Crackle with Power is pretty interesting too, because I think when people, when they kill you with Crackle with Power, I think people are more likely to forgive it if they kill the entire table versus more of like a targeted deal. But I also think that since they said attack, they did not attack you in the attack phase, and then they killed you, that is a completely different thing, at least in my eyes.
I can see where the 12% of people who say it's not fine are coming from. I think if you took this to the extreme and everyone had to choose their words perfectly, every single sentence, or they get screwed over, that's kind of annoying. But I think when you go about specifically reaching out to other people, which is what we're talking about here with like politics and political deals, and you specifically ask for something and they specifically respond to you and you guys try to make an arrangement, I think it's okay to choose your words very carefully. You can even make it known that you're going to choose your words carefully and they have to, analyze what you're saying. Attack means attack in this case, right? It doesn't mean that I won't fireball you or I won't crackle with power you or I won't play Torment to Hailfire. And you can make your deals accordingly, right? Like you can say, you can't cause me to lose life. And I can either accept that or reject that. And then we can move from there. That's part of the deal. But if you say, you don't make me lose life, then it wouldn't really be warranted for me to crackle with power you because that breaks the deal that you made.
I think there's points where it gets a little too rules lawyery when it's like, don't kill my creature. Okay, I won't destroy it. I'll exile it. I think that's a little bit different. But the attack phase and ending the game are two very different things. There was like one time when BZ and I were playing a game. We were the last 3 people in. I said I wouldn't attack him for the entire turn, and I attacked the other person. But I have a veto on the field, so I give everything lifelink, and then aim it all at BZ and just win the game. Games have to end at some point, and I didn't attack BZ, so I think that is pretty justified.
I was like, oh crap. When as soon as you played veto, I was like, well, I know how this is going to go down. Maybe she won't activate it. And then obviously you activate it because I was just dead. I really wasn't mad about that. I think I want to focus more on the 88% of people who say it's fine, where if I craft a specific deal, as long as it's not ridiculous fine print, I think the level that we're talking about, attacking versus non-combat damage, totally reasonable, as most people seem to agree. And I think it's fine to make those deals yourself. But overall, I'm absolutely on the side of the 88% of people who say that this specific example that we provided was okay. I think games just need to end. That's another thing that you brought up that is just so important. Like crafty deals, definitely okay in small doses, definitely fine, generally speaking. But I think on the opposite end of that, where people don't do the crafty deals, right, and they just go for, I want infinite immunity forever, for 5 turns, infinite immunity for everything, and it's like, that to me is just kind of boring. I like when there's a little bit of wiggle room. If I say, don't attack me and I'll give you this, and they say, no, I don't want to do that. I want full protection. And I just go, no, that helps games end. It's a little cheeky. It is maybe a little unexpected. I think it can also just be good for you. I would say, to cap this thing off, generally avoid the infinite immunity forever deals and focus more on the one big thing, like don't attack me or don't kill my creatures or, whatever. Even if you want to do protection, that's fine. But honestly, stick away from the 3 turns protection and go more towards make a deal. They don't have to accept every deal. Not a deal. Every deal has to be made. You can offer some aggressive terms. I think it's good for you in the long run.
I completely agree because infinite is not infinite, for instance, but 3 turns is a very long time. If I make a deal with you and say I will not do anything for 3 turns, even starting on turn 2, there are decks that are a little bit faster, or even decks that are a little bit more aggro, where at the end of 3 turns, I might have been able to close out the game in a perfect hand scenario. So I think that putting that term on with the 3 turn term is just way too long, and you don't have enough information to make deals. If you want to make something that's kind of recurring, where okay, 1 turn of protection, we'll see how this pans out next turn, or it's hey, I don't want to hit you until you have had your 3rd land drop because it's turn 5. That might make sense, but I think the promising for long periods of time without knowing the stuff is a little bit rough.
Next up, we're going to talk about knowing what to tutor for. Tutors are prevalent in almost every commander deck, certainly at most power levels. Even if you get into the lesser power levels, there will still be tutors, but they'll be more specific. So there won't be as many demonic tutors, but there might be fierce empaths. And I think knowing what to tutor for could definitely trip people up in a lot of scenarios. I think players just get overwhelmed by it. And there's a couple heuristics here that we have that are definitely going to help you. And I think the first one is really important. It might seem like when you cast demonic tutor, you've got 90 cards to look through. It's oh my God, what am I supposed to get? But the hard truth is that tutors aren't actually any card in your deck. I think it's fair to say that they're only the best card in each scenario that could rise up. There are a couple of scenarios that could rise up. I think, as far as I could tell, this is most of the different scenarios you're going to come across. First, you're winning and you need to finish the game. Second, you're losing and you need to come back from behind in some way. Next, there's a strong threat that needs answering, or you're at parity and need to present a threat, or you need to ramp out your mana and hit your land drops or something along those lines. I think that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think most of the time when you're playing a game and you have a tutor, you'll need to fulfill one of those 5 objectives. And I think it's better to look at what is my best version of every one of those objectives. There might be 1 or 2, but I think that already narrows you down from 99 cards in this overwhelming, like, blank canvas kind of deal to, oh, okay, well, if I'm behind, I'm going to need to break parity. I need a board wipe or something. What's my best board wipe? All right, my tutor is going to be that card. It'll be easier to know.
I think that when you are at a certain point in the game, you have to think about what your goals are at that turn and maybe the next turn after. Because if you're firing off a Vamp Tutor on someone's end step, you're going to be playing that card probably immediately, or at least very, very soon. Maybe you're getting protection for your win con because you have your win con in your hand. Just, I guess, thinking about what scenario you are in at that very moment and then thinking of what do I need to make sure this goes through, or, like, you know, what can set me up for a better turn if it's very early in the game. I know I've had to use Demonic Tutor for a land before because I'm never getting a 5, 6, 7 drop if I'm struggling to hit land drops to begin with.
Yeah, and I think that's even probably the simplest example of when you are trying to hit your land drop on turn 3 because you missed it and you have your first 2 lands. When you cast Demonic Tutor, it's not any land in your deck. It's the best land in your deck, or it's the land that makes the most mana. I think it's basically those are the only 2 options. If you don't have an Ancient Tomb in your deck, and you don't have something that's going to ramp you ahead, like a Phyrexian Tower or a Gaia's Cradle, that's fine. Then you just get whatever dual land enters the battlefield untapped. So probably just Command Tower. That's, I think, one of the most tutored for lands for a reason. Like, why would I get Swamp if I'm a blue-black deck when I can just get Command Tower? So picturing out what's my best land for mana fixing, what's my best land for ramp, maybe you could do it like that and say, now in this scenario, every time you have to cast Demonic Tutor to hit a land drop, you know immediately what to get because you just have that sort of like built into your head. And even if you don't know the exact card, you know basically what you're looking for.
I mean, I think it's also knowing your deck very, very well. I think the more you know your deck, the more lines you know, what you have as your value pieces, what you should really be protecting. You'll know what to get over time. But using things like Moxfield.com, the best place online to build a deck, you can actually look at these pieces and you can tag things as like things I want to tutor for. That is a tag you could put in. You could tutor, you can use it as a way to tutor, and it's a great website.
Yeah, Moxfield's super great. When you go to tutor, I think actually if you're allowed to go on your phone, if no one has a problem with that, which I wouldn't when I'm tutoring anyway, it's downtime. I'm either looking at my deck thinking or looking at my phone thinking. It's all about the game. So I think it's totally fine to go on Moxfield. It actually saves you time. Just scroll through your deck, put it on Visual Grid. Moxfield has all the layouts that you could possibly need. You use Visual Grid and tutor that way. And then once you eyeball it, great, go find it. And I think it also helps because everything's organized and your lands are all at the bottom. So if you either know, right, when you tutor, I want a land or I want a non-land. You already know that every time. The lands are stuck at the bottom, so if you need to find a land, cool. They're all in one place. Otherwise, you don't have to see them, every other card just messing you up. I think it saves time for sure. And it's barely even an ad because it's how to tutor better. It is definitely part of that. I think, so for tutoring, if you want to not be overwhelmed as much, keep in mind your best win cons, your best combo pieces or finishers, your best board wipes, your best spot removal, and your best value engines. That will cover you for 90% of tutors that you have to do. If you generally know the best 1 or 2 versions of those cards in your deck that has tutors in it, you are set up for success.
The next one that we have to talk about is one that is one of my personal goals this year. It is to mulligan better. It's my New Year's resolution, actually. Some players lose the game before the game even begins because they kept a bad hand. It's never a great idea to keep a hand to save time or because I'm sick of mulliganing or sick of shuffling, which I've done before, and it's completely understandable, but it's not good for your win percentage because you'd rather keep a good hand and make sure you have a couple plays on turns 1, 2, and 3, which are vital to make sure your game plan is going smoothly versus just having a hand where it's like, okay, well, I have 4 lands in a turn 4 play. That means you're probably not doing anything or you have nothing definite planned for the first few turns, and that is just a bad setup for success.
Yeah, the Commander game is usually a 30 to 60 minute endeavor. And when you make these rash decisions about, sick of mulliganing, I'm trying to save time, you actually end up ruining the next 30 to 60 minutes to save what I can only imagine is 1 or 2 minutes to just, finish mulliganing, take your time, mash shuffle, the right number of times. Get 8 mass shuffles in there so that your deck's random. Draw the opening hand. It's okay because you're planning out for so much time ahead. It could really ruin like your whole night if you do one snap keep that doesn't actually make sense or that is a bad idea or is risky. But even if we want to take those away, and I want to say, as a random tip, don't make rash decisions. Try to envision your good hands and go for those. We can move into like trying to keep a good hand and actually make sure that your deck gets to play. I think that the best thing is you have to know your deck's game plan. I think a really good question to ask yourself is, what are my first 3 turns going to look like? What should my first 3 turns of my deck, of my commander deck, tend to look like? Well, if I have a 4-mana commander, I really want that commander in play on turn 3 like 90% of the time. So maybe you really want to emphasize hitting a 1-drop, a dork, or a 2-drop, a signet into your commander on turn 3. That could influence like half of your mana curve, but it should also influence your mulligan decisions. If your commander desperately needs to be in play on turn 3, and it's really, really important and much, much better than hitting at turn 4, if you draw your first 7 and you can't do that, ship it. You get a free mulligan. I think that's another thing people don't factor in is you get an entirely free mulligan. You can send back a meh hand all day.
I think that a keepable 5 that you can play with is better than a stinky 7 that you can't play with. I mean, I've been trying to be so aggressive with mulligans. I've mulliganed down to 3 before, which is not the best idea. Don't like follow that 100% of the time. But I think that if you have a better hand and you actively have like 6 lands and a 7-drop or, 1 land and just a bunch of stuff you can't really play unless you draw the second land off the top, it is so much better to go down a card and make sure you have something you can set up with versus keep that and just hoping for the best because you have 7 cards.
Yeah, I think a really good example, and I just had this happen the other day. Whenever the last game we played, that was it. I have a Balmor deck. Balmor wants really cheap creatures, really cheap token makers, and it wants a buttload of card draw. It needs to fill its hand constantly because that's how it triggers Balmor to give +1/+0 and trample over and over. So I kept a Balmor hand against our editor Chris and Mia, and it had no card draw, but it was a perfectly fine hand. It had some payoffs, it had some token makers, and it had 3 lands in it. I'm like, okay, great. And so I keep it, and it was terrible. It was terrible. I fizzled out so hard, couldn't do anything for like 6 turns until I happened to naturally draw into it. And even then, I feel like I got bailed out by luck. And there was a version of that game where I sit there and do nothing. And I lost the game, and I deserved to because I kept what I knew was a hand that didn't have one of the core pieces of the deck, and I was appropriately punished. If you were one of these Spellslinger decks, you need card draw, or you are going to just wither and die.
There is such a big difference between, is this a playable hand and is this a good hand? And keeping that in mind when you do mulligans, even if it takes an extra minute, is so crucial to the success of your deck to begin with. I think when we talk about mulligans, there are generally things that we usually just will always ship. That's a ton of lands, 5, 6, 7 lands, and nothing really to play with them. Lands that don't, like hands that don't have many lands, 2, 1, 0, obviously. We don't want to keep the 0 lander. And then things that 1 land and a Soul Ring. I think this is such an iffy one.
That's a classic controversy.
I was like, I don't want to keep this. I have been punished way too many times. Even if I've gone into the land, the Soul Ring, the Mana Crypt, and the Arcane Signet, not having the colored mana and then like the Vandal Blast or whatever has hurt me like more often than not. I've learned. Don't worry.
So I am fully on board with mulliganing 1 land Soul Ring. I'm pretty sure I'm keeping whatever nonsense hand you just described of Signet, Mana Crypt, and Soul Ring. I'm going to keep that because that's like 17 mana sources. But I'm definitely, if we just go to the controversy, the thing that so many players have kept, the 1 land Soul Ring, I think you should probably mulligan. But I think if you have the Arcane Signet follow-up, you might want to keep, because at that point you're diversified enough, and even if they blow up the Soul Ring, you still have 2 colored sources. So if you have ramp or card draw at some point after that, for the next turn, you're kind of online. Another heuristic I like to do is, if I have a 2-lander, I've definitely kept many 2-landers in my career. The 2-lander needs card draw or ramp that is castable on 2 mana for me to want to keep it, because you do get a decent amount of looks at a 3rd land, but missing your 3rd land is kind of devastating. So if I have a way to mitigate that, like I can play a Nature's Lore after I hit 2 lands, cool. that's fine. Or if I have a way to cycle a card with a Street Wraith or like a cheap draw to like a Charter Course, I'm in. I'm going to keep this. I'm going to know that luck is generally on my side, but I think without that extra little boost, I'm going to mulligan a random 2-lander.
I am so bad about keeping 2-landers. I've been burned so many times with 2-landers. But I do agree that if you have, if you have the Arcane Signet, if you have the Mind Stone, if you have something like that where you can get the little bit of boost, it really does make a difference in the long run when it makes the hand just a little bit more playable.
Yeah, I think 3 and 4-landers are probably generally keepable as a rule of thumb. That's where you just need to figure out, how early do I want to get my commander out? Do I desperately need something in my hand besides just 3 or 4 lands? Like for Balmore's example, a lot of card draw. Or maybe my Queen Marchesa deck really, really, really wants a Signet, and I would happily mull it to 5 to find one, which is why I'm playing like 8 or 9 of them. Mulligans are definitely really tricky. There's a lot to cover. I think we could even learn something from our friends over the CDH community, because they mulligan very, very aggressively. And I know there's a lot of factors to mulliganing, like how much fast mana is in your deck, how many tutors, how fast is your deck going to be able to win. Those are all factors to how much you even can mulligan, because I think the more of those things that you add to your deck, the more you should be mulliganing to find your best hands, because the disparity of your best card versus your worst card is huge. Mana Crypt is a ridiculous card. Sol Ring is a ridiculous card. If you're a deck that wants to find those every game, I think it makes sense to mulligan more, especially take the free mulligan. If your hand is meh, at least, if you listen to nothing else from this section, take the free mulligan more. I think you will be happy with it.
I think so too. CEDH is one of the reasons why I have been trying to mulligan to better hands, like objectively better hands. But if you want to learn a little bit more about deck building tips and just tips in general, why don't you check out this video right here? It has us in it.